So you're using Wix and you're displaying data on your site that you want to filter using a slider. Welcome back to the Wix Wiz. I'm Eitan, and today we're going to be talking about how to build something like this, where you have a slider. When you move it, it will filter the data underneath. So for example, here we're showing all the cars from a certain year and under based on where the user has placed the slider value. We're going to be doing that using just a few lines of simple Velo code. So if you want to learn how to do all that and more, first, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet, so that you don't miss out on future videos, because I know you'll forget once we hop in, and then it will be super interesting and you'll get so engrossed in the tutorial that you'll completely forget to subscribe. So just do it now before you forget, and let's get started. For today's tutorial, we are still here inside of Wix Studio, and we're continuing with the same setup that we built in some previous episodes of this series. If you haven't noticed, this is a series, so if you feel like you're not understanding or following along at some point, you might want to check out previous episodes to get some context. In this setup that we have here, we have some filters that we attach to a data set, and we also have a repeater which is connected to a data set, which is connected to our cars collection and displaying data from the cars collection. Today we are going to be talking about a slider. A slider is a UI element which can be used to slide and determine a certain value. You can find it over here inside of Add Elements. And if you go over here to Input and look for sliders, okay, right over here, then you'll find these few different sliders that Wix offers. So for example, we can drag this one right over here and attach it on the bottom. And as you can see, it's essentially like a knob that you can drag along a line to determine a certain value. It's commonly used for values that have a certain range, such as you can see here, like a price or years, or a certain length of time or something along those lines. So something that you wouldn't only have a few set options, but can really be a range between a minimum and maximum value. If we take a look at our sliders CMS connection options right over here, we'll notice that we don't have that option that we saw earlier of choosing between filtering data and collecting content. We're by default inside of collect content, which means that we're not going to be able to use this slider easily as a filter, but rather we're going to have to take an approach similar to the one that we took when we set up our double layer filters in episode 2 of this series. Before we start doing any coding, we're going to need to determine the minimum and maximum values for our slider. There are two approaches that we can take for this. The no code option, which is probably okay in many scenarios, is just to know our data and either go to our collection or use an Excel sheet or something along those lines in order to find the lowest and highest possible values inside of our collection. So for example, if I look at the model years, I can determine that the lowest one is, let's say, 1950, and the highest one would be the current year, or something along those lines. And the same would go for price. I just would have to know my data and know what the possible minimum and maximum values would be. Another option would be to determine this programmatically using code. I'm going to save that for the very end of the tutorial because it's rather complex compared to the other elements that we're going to be coding. And I think that just knowing your data and determining these manually is probably relevant for the large majority of the people who are using this tutorial. So I'm going to set up those minimum and maximum values by going into the settings of the slider and going over here to minimum and maximum value. And so for the minimum value, since I'm going to be using this as a filter for the model year, which we have here displayed on the side in our repeater, I'm going to set the minimum value as 1950 because I think that that's a little bit below the lowest option that we have. And I'm going to set the maximum value to be 2024 because that is the current year. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And for the default selected value, I'm just going to set it, let's say, for example, at the year 2000. Okay, so now that we've set that up, so we're going from 1950 to 2024 with a default of 2000. We're ready to hop in and start writing some code to actually implement the filter functionality. If you don't have coding enabled already, then you're going to want to go over here to turn on code mode if you're in Wix Studio, or up here on top, you'll see something called dev mode if you are inside of Wix Classic. Once you've turned that on, then you should have access to this IDE here on the bottom, which is where we are going to be writing our code. In order to write our code efficiently, we're going to want to give our UI elements, our Wix elements, meaningful names. In order to do that, we're just going to select the element and then go over here to the properties and events panel on the bottom right and give it a name. So now it's just called slider, but I'm going to call this, let's say, my year slider. Okay, just so I know that this is the slider for the year and I can easily identify what its purpose is in my code later on. I'm going to do the same for the data set that this repeater is connected to. So if I go ahead over here and click connected to CMS, and I find the cars data set and go to dataset settings, then you can see here that I have a dataset ID, and I'm just going to call this the cars dataset. We've done this already a few times during the previous episode, so I'm kind of picking up pace here. But if you feel like I'm going a little too fast, you might want to check out some of those previous episodes. Now that we've done that, we're ready to set up our filter. And again, this is something that we did in episode 2. So if again you feel I'm working a little fast here for your pace, I would go check out episode 2 where we did the double layer filter, and this is very, very similar. So here inside of our IDE, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the commented out code. And we're going to be writing all of our code over here inside of the onReady. So first of all, what I'll do is I will select our dropdown, select our slider. So it's going to be our slider, year slider, dot on change. And inside of the on change, we're going to select our data set. So that's our cars dataset dot onReady. Okay, so first we're going to tap into the onReady for the dataset, make sure that all our data has loaded, and only after it's loaded we are going to set up a filter. So that's going to be selecting our dataset again and using set filter. And inside of set filter, we're going to be using something called Wix data. In order to use Wix data, we're going to need to import it up here on top. So I'm going to go ahead and import Wix data. Luckily, it fixes my spelling, which as you can see, has some issues. And here inside of set filter, we can now use Wix data and set dot filter. And now we need to determine what we're going to filter by. So since we are filtering the model year, we need to determine, okay, what do we want to include inside of the model year filter? Do we want to have only cars that have the exact year that we selected from the slider? Do we want to have cars that are that year and lower, that year and higher? So typically when you're using a slider, you'll want one of the two latter options that I presented. So you're using the slider in order to indicate that you're including everything until a certain point or everything from a certain point. Since the way our slider is set up is that it starts from lower to highest and you can kind of drag it towards the highest, I think it makes sense to say that when you set it at a certain year, it will be everything from that year and under, but you can obviously set it up also from the UI aspect based on the needs of your specific project. So in order to set the filter to be all that value that's been selected and all the values under it, we're going to use equals to, one second, less or equals to. Okay, so you'll see here that we have LE, LT, and also GE and GT. So those stand for less and equal or less than. So less and equal would be including the value, and less than would be everything under the selected value. And GT and GE are the same, just with the word greater. So greater or equals or greater than, respectively. Okay, so that value and up, or etc. So since we want that value and everything under it, I'm going to choose LE. And then over here, we're going to need the field that we're going to be filtering by. So in order to find that, we're going to reference our databases over here inside of the code panel and our cars collection. And specifically, we're doing this based on the model year. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our code, and as a string inside of quotation marks, I'm going to put over here model year. The last piece of the puzzle that we're going to need is the actual value of the slider. To get the value of the slider, we have two ways that we can do that. So first I'm going to create a new variable to store the value of the year. Then we can either select the slider like this, so slider, year slider, and then say dot value. Specifically inside of an onChange, we also have the option to tap into the event itself and get the value using the event.target.value. The advantage of doing it this way is because it'll make our code a little more reusable. But if we're really just building out this one specific feature, then there's no harm in doing it this way. Once we have the year, we can go ahead and put it right over here. So I'm just going to write here year, and that's it. So our filter is set up. So now when we move our slider, it should filter our cars data set and respectively our repeater so that we only see cars from that certain year and lower. So let's check it out in preview mode. I'm going to go over here and hop into preview mode. And let's go ahead and start moving our slider. You can see there's a slight UI UX problem here that it still has the $sign. So that's a little confusing. We can obviously remove that. And it says price, which is a little misleading since it's the year. But we know what we did. So let's go ahead and start to drag this around. So let's drag this, let's say, to 1994. And we can see here now that all the dates here are 1994 and under. Okay, let's make it a little lower, so 1985. And you can see here now all of them are 1985 and lower. I can drag it up a little bit, so let's drag it here to 2012. And everything is now 2012 and lower. Okay, so to me it pretty much seems like it's working. And with that, we are going to wrap up. I hope you found this informative and it'll help you implement a slider like this in your project on your website. If you enjoyed the tutorial and found it useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you don't want to miss content like this, which comes out weekly, that can really help you boost your Wix website, then I would recommend subscribing to the channel. It's a great way to be reminded and stay up to date. And as always, you're welcome to leave any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have in the comments below. And I'll see you next time. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. This tutorial may be over, but that doesn't mean that your journey has to end here. YouTube will have some recommendations up above in a moment for more videos, but don't get too distracted because my eyes are over here, and on the WixWiz website we have a lot more resources for you to continue learning or get support for your business or project. We've got a blog, beginner courses, and a community forum where you can vent about Velo or post some tough questions like, why does my header have a mind of its own? On the website, you can also find my personal calendar to schedule a one-on-one and details about getting ongoing assistance from our team of Wix experts. I'll catch you later, and don't forget that every big feature was once a small bug.